Welcome to the Rev and the Rav, a program of interreligious dialogue and discovery. I'm Reverend Nick Carter, president of Andover Newton Theological School.
I'm Rabbi Daniel Lehmann, president of Hebrew College.
Danny, I'm mindful that current Torah readings involve the Ten Commandments, which is a topic we haven't talked about. But I sort of get the feeling that maybe we should talk about the Ten Commandments. Since it's such a definitive moment in Jewish identity, the granting of the Ten Commandments on Sinai, I'd be sort of interested in what kind of place does the Ten Commandments have in contemporary Jewish life?
So this week's Torah portion coming up is the Ten Commandments as described in the book of Exodus. We actually read the Ten Commandments liturgically in the synagogue 3 times a year. We read it as the Exodus portion comes up. We read it again when the Deuteronomy version of the Ten Commandments comes.
Slightly different.
Slightly different. And then we also read it on the holiday of Shavuot, Pentecost, because that is the holiday that we focus on the Sinai revelation. So we again read the Ten Commandments and the giving of the Torah or the revelation at Sinai as a part of the celebration of that holiday 50 days after of Passover, beginning of Passover. But beyond those liturgical readings, I would say the Ten Commandments becomes an essential symbol of Judaism. I mean, if you go into many, many synagogues, the tablets of the law are very, very often placed above the Holy Ark, where the Torah is kept. The Jewish chaplain in the U.S. military wears a lapel pin of the Ten Commandments.
Not a Jewish star.
Not a Jewish star. It's the Ten Commandments that become the symbol of Judaism. I would say the tablets of the law and the menorah, the candelabra of the temple, become probably the 2 most ubiquitous symbols of Judaism, used by Jews and I think used by non-Jews to identify Judaism. And the whole Star of David symbol, which has become an important representation of Judaism, that is not rooted in the tradition, much later, and doesn't have the same theological significance as the Ten Commandments do. But there is a great controversy surrounding the Ten Commandments in terms of its liturgical centrality, because it used to be in temple times, late temple times, that the Ten Commandments were recited daily as a part of the daily service, ritual. And later on, there was great concern that there were both Jewish sects and early Christian sects that made exclusive claims about the revelatory status of the Ten Commandments. I mean, the Ten Commandments were what were revealed by God, and all of the other commandments were kind of secondary.
Yeah.
And in order to disavow that claim, there was a rabbinic move to say, no, we're not going to recite the Ten Commandments on a regular basis in order to avoid that problem. And there's even controversy when it's read liturgically 3 times a year, whether you stand. Most congregations will stand during the recitation of the Ten Commandments themselves. But historically, there have been many people, including Maimonides, who said, no, you shouldn't stand because we don't want to give greater significance to the 10 in relationship to all of the other commandments.
So there's a differentiation between the symbol of the Ten Commandments and the granting of them on Sinai, as opposed to the content of the Ten Commandments.
Right. I mean, the content's significant, but there are many traditions which understand the Ten Commandments as really being categories under which all of the other commandments can be placed. So it's not that these 10 are, the most essential or the most significant. It's that they kind of represent the broader commandments. And there's even significant discussion about what they are. We Christians
Yeah.
and Jews and Catholics and Protestants have actually different numbers.
Right. Slightly different.
Slightly,
Yeah, yeah.
what are the numbers? So for
Particularly
Jews,
at the beginning.
right?
Yeah.
So for Jews, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt becomes a separate commandment.
Sure.
A commandment either to believe in God or to believe in God who intervenes in history, or to believe in God who's the Redeemer. Some aspect of that.
Sure. And then and even within the Christian family, we divide a little bit on at the end about covet. Is it one commandment or two?
two, right, right.
Augustine said that maybe it's two.
Right. So even among Christians and Jews, there are 3 or 4
Yeah.
different.
Do you
versions.
sense that there's also some priority in the first commandments versus the others?
Not really. To some degree, the first ones deal with one's relationship to God, and then you get towards your relationship to other human beings. And it's interesting, the commandment of honoring your parents is seen as the bridge, because on the one hand, it's between human beings. On the other hand, your parents kind of represent this authority figure, and the rabbinic tradition is that any child that is born has 3 parents, in a sense, the 2 parents and God. God is the partner. So that honoring your parents is kind of a transition from the God-focused stuff to the human-focused stuff. But there's an interesting difference of opinion within early rabbinic writing about how the 10 Commandments are actually represented or written on the 2 tablets. And if you stop any Jew or Christian
Right.
on the street and you say, well, how are the 10 Commandments written on the tablets? Everybody will say the first 5 on one tablet and
Yeah.
then the second 5 on the second tablet. And any depiction you have of the 10 Commandments in a synagogue
Right.
always has it that way. But there are rabbinic sources that claim that that's a minority opinion. And the majority opinion of the rabbinic scholars is that there are actually 10 commandments on each of the 2 tablets.
Really? Why duplication?
Well, either because it's a kind of contract, so
Yeah.
there's a copy for...
God keeps a copy?
Right, there's a copy for you, there's a copy for God kind of thing. Or maybe there's concern about one breaking, or even 2 breaking. Maybe there's a desire for one to go out with the people and one to stay in the camp or in the temple.
Yeah.
I don't know. But my theory is that because there are 2 different versions of the 10 Commandments, an Exodus and a
and
Deuteronomy, and they're slightly different. They're different with regard to the Sabbath description in that commandment. They're also different in terms of, to some degree, how it describes some of the commandments around idol worship. There's slight differences between them. The Jewish tradition actually makes quite a big deal out of the different description of Shabbat, of Sabbath, because one of them references creation as the basis for the Sabbath. The other one references the Exodus from Egypt. In other words, you should have your slaves, your maidservants, your manservants, your animals rest because you were slaves in the land of Egypt. The other version doesn't reference Egypt. And these 2 different versions have become in the tradition important symbols of different aspects of the Sabbath. And in fact, we have 2 candles and 2 loaves of bread. Many people suggest that those are for the 2 different ways that the Sabbath is described in the 2 different versions.
Well, now I have a problem with that.
Yeah.
I guess the trouble is, I can understand the attempt to reconcile what exists between Exodus and Deuteronomy, but it sort of implies that God was of 2 minds. That God said, well, there's this set of commandments and then there's this set of commandments. For me, that doesn't work.
Right.
My image of God is here it is.
Right.
When I speak once, and that the difference is how humans have tried to respond to having heard God's word.
Right. So that's
and that you see these sort of culturally different things that maybe were written at different times and
Right.
different, taking an oral tradition and trying to put it down.
So that
Right.
that certainly is compelling and a possibility. The rabbinic tradition actually very explicitly states, with regard to
Yeah.
Shabbat in particular, that the two different versions were said in one utterance by God at Sinai, which theologically, I think, means that God's word, by its very nature, inherently, is multiple and complex. So you think that when God reveals himself at Sinai, which is the most definitive and clear expression of God's will from a Jewish perspective, Sinai represents a moment where all of the people hear God's voice. It's not through a
Yeah.
prophet. That you'd think that that moment you'd get a very singular list. And in fact, what this might be saying from a Jewish theological perspective is there is no such thing. Meaning, any expression of God's will is going to contain with it multiplicity. And the oneness of God is not in the simplicity, not the unity, but the bringing together of complexity in one being. So when we end up interpreting it or putting it down, yes, it comes into two versions, but the multiplicity or the duality of it actually exists at the moment of revelation, which is why in Jewish tradition, interpretation becomes so significant, because you're actually just fleshing out the complexity and multiplicity of God's word.
Well, I guess the part that could work for me is the sense in which God is so awesome, God is ineffable, that this bridge to God speaking, and how is it heard by humans?
Right.
That the magnificence of God's word,
Or the mystery. Even.
the mystery of it, even,
Right, yeah.
is so complex,
Right.
is so that human minds can only grasp a piece of it.
Or that it has to separate it into multiples,
Right.
because we can't handle simultaneity of multiplicity.
Yeah, but the issue for me that I need to think more about this is the degree to which it suggests. I mean, I could see the different interpretations, but the degree to which there is a unified source is what's important.
Right.
And if it begins to imply that there are differences in that, it starts to undermine the unified nature of the source.
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's a rabbinic midrash, a rabbinic statement, which says that when God revealed the Torah, he revealed it in 49 aspects of purity and 49 aspects of impurity. Meaning that within the revelation contains these kind of contradictions. And it's interesting to note that in Hebrew, the Ten Commandments isn't commandments. The word in Hebrew, aseret hadibrot, means the 10 statements, the 10 words, the 10 sayings, and they're not commandments in the Hebrew, even though that's how we've understood them and certainly how we've described them.
Well, I know for the Christian family, children are brought up basically in Sunday school. This is where many places where you begin. And then as you get older, there is deeper reflection on the different commandments and what the words may mean. And then as adults in worship and in study, there is a continual reflection of how do I integrate that teaching in what I do.
But not a liturgical focus.
There really is not. I mean, pastors will preach on different commandments and on the Sinai event. But there's not a fixed liturgical thing in our liturgical calendar. Well, with that, I think we've hinted at how complex and how exciting this question is of the Ten Commandments, and I'm sure we'll end up coming back to it at another point. But for today, we want to say thank you for joining us for the Rev and the Rav. I'm Reverend Nick Carter, Andover Newton Theological School. Peace.
And I'm Rabbi Daniel Lehmann from Hebrew College. Shalom.